Hello and welcome to Section 1, Episode 29 of the LUFC Fan Zone podcast. I'm Sam Isles.
And I'm Jack Ellis.
And each episode we'll be talking to an ex-Leeds United player or manager about their time at the club. Last episode was the second section of our show with former Leeds United striker and Northern Ireland striker David Healy. And in last week's episode we were speaking with David about Leeds' relegation from the Championship into League One for the first time in the club's history. The game which all but secured Leeds' relegation was against Ipswich Town at Ellen Road, and although David had never been the captain of Leeds before that game, he was given the armband for that match, which he was explaining in that episode was quite a surreal experience for him, wasn't it, Jack?
Yeah, he was actually given the armband because of some unrest in the changing room, so the manager at the time, Dennis Wise, made him captain for that game, and before that he had never been captain, and he was talking about how surreal it felt for him to be captain in such a meaningful game that went down in Leeds history, albeit for the wrong reasons. And that game against Ipswich was his last game for Leeds, and the club knew that he was the most valuable asset and knew that he was going to be sold, so they didn't want him to get injured for that final game of the season at Derby.
Yeah, and of course at that time, like you mentioned, he didn't play at Derby because Leeds didn't want him to get injured and ruin a potential sale following relegation, which for him turned out to be a £1.5 million move to Fulham in the Premier League. But that money was vital for Leeds at that time because, of course, at the end of that 2006-07 season, Leeds went into administration and effectively that £1.5 million from the sale of David Healy helped Leeds to survive.
Well, yeah, David knew himself that he was the most valuable player at the time and understood why he didn't play against Derby, but when he joined the club, he didn't really know how bad the financial situation was and how badly it was going to escalate during his time at the club, and Leeds were in huge debt and went into administration for the first time at the end of the 2006-07 season and got a 10-point deduction, which saw Leeds finish bottom of the Championship, and then another administration followed for the second time, and just a couple months later, just before the League One season had even started, which saw another 15 points deducted. But for all we know, the situation could have been even worse if Leeds didn't cash in on David at that particular time.
Yeah, of course. And if you haven't had the chance to listen to that episode with David Healy, or if you've missed any of our other shows, they're all available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast, simply by searching the LUFC Fan Zone podcast. Just before we go into today's show, today's episode is sponsored by the Mystery Football Kit Co.
So the guys over at Mystery Football Kit Co have reached out to us and happily agreed to sponsor the podcast and support us as a small business ourselves. They are Leeds fans, and what they are offering is a Mystery Football Kit Box. And if you're not sure what a Mystery Football Kit Box is, it's the opportunity to get your hands on a shirt you might not have got before. It's from any team, from any time, including this season as well, all over the globe.
All you have to do is select your size on their website, as well as any kits or colours you don't want to feature in your mystery box. So obviously you'll be selecting no red kits in that category straight away. And your very own mystery shirt will arrive on your doorstep, and you won't know what kit you've received until you open up.
All of their shirts are handpicked to each order, and every item is of high quality, and I must emphasise as well, genuine, brand new football shirt from either this year or any previous year from any club around the world.
And because of our partnership, as well as the fact that we like to look out for our listeners, if you enter the code LUFC FanZone at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your order. So make sure you head over to Mystery Football Kit Co on Instagram or www.mysteryfootballkitco.com to check them out, and make sure you add the discount code LUFC FanZone at checkout. But on to today's show, and this week is the 1 year anniversary of the launch of the LUFC FanZone podcast. And 1 year since our very first show with Saul Bamba. In that year, we've had the chance to speak with some amazing guests and some incredible former Leeds United players. However, today's guest is someone who can only be described as Leeds United royalty. Today's guest was the manager of Leeds United for 400 games between October 1988 and September 1996, before departing to become the manager of the England national team. During his time at Leeds, he not only helped the side win Division 2 title in the 1989-90 season, but just 2 seasons later, Leeds won the First Division title under his tenure, and still to this day, 30 years later, remains the most recent English manager to win the top division of English football. His managerial style at Leeds earned him the nickname of Sergeant Wilco for his strict discipline, and he still remains one of the greatest managers Leeds United have ever had. That's right. This week, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by former Leeds United manager, Howard Wilkinson. Howard, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Always glad and happy to speak to true Leeds supporters.
And it's been over 30 years now, Howard, since you took over at Leeds. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but yesterday it was exactly 31 years to the day when Leeds won the Division 2 title at Bournemouth. So obviously that's something we'll move on to in a bit. However, your last job in management was in 2004 in Shanghai in China. So you've been out of management for 17 years now. And because of that, what have you been up to in the last few years? Because obviously you haven't had a team to manage. So have you been doing any sort of coaching or even taking up any new sports, or have you decided it's just time to have a break?
No. Starting in 1992, when we formed the League Managers Association, myself, Graham Taylor, and a couple of people who were running it with us, for us. So that, as it were, being chairman of that, started to fill part of my time, because we were trying to build our association up. And on top of that, I was doing quite a lot of coach education for UEFA, and also part of a number of UEFA projects which were designed to improve the standard of coach education across Europe, which at that time in some countries was nearly zero. And we were trying to also make sure that there was some standardization across all the countries in Europe with regard to qualifications, which were becoming, and rightly so, increasingly important in terms of the production of coaches and future managers. So in that respect, I suppose for us to give you two broad headings, it would be welfare in terms of the League Managers Association and what we were trying to do for our members. And on the other hand, coach education with regard to better standards of coach education across Europe for UEFA.
Yeah, and obviously today's show is all about your time at Leeds. And like I mentioned earlier, you arrived at Leeds 33 years ago in October 1988 to be exact, from Sheffield Wednesday, of course. But can you remember when you were first approached by Leeds and the chairman at the time, Leslie Silver, about the possibility of becoming Leeds United manager, and how you felt about making the switch from Sheffield Wednesday to Leeds?
I was at Sheffield Wednesday, and we were doing quite well in the first division, having got promoted after my first season with them. And Leeds came on via the reporter and expressed the desire on behalf of Leeds to speak to me. And I basically said, "You've got to be joking, haven't you? Why would I want to go from fifth top of the first division to next bottom of the second division?" Anyway, subsequent to that, I got a call from Leslie Silver, and then I got a call from Bill Follaby, and then another call from Bill Follaby, and so on and so forth, until after about 3 or 4 weeks, I said, okay, I'll come and meet you. First meeting with Bill Follaby and Leslie was amicable, but, thank you very much again. But obviously, I'd rather stay where I am. Anyway, they persisted. And there were a number of meetings between myself and phone calls between myself and Leslie in particular. And then on the last occasion, when I went to see Leslie, we spent a long, long time together. And at the end of that, he and I, and to a degree Bill Follaby, had, as it were, mapped out a hypothetical plan for Leeds United to, 1, get promoted, to 2, win the first division, to 3, do well in Europe, 4, to develop what are now called academies, but what I then had as an idea for youth development, whereby we had a link with a school. We built a new training ground. We built, if you like, a hall of residence. And we had boys coming to us at 14, 15, 16, because we had a partnership with the local school. So we were if you like, a public school, but a public school for footballers. And I, as it were, said to them, if we go with this plan, then that part of it, that youth development part of it, will not pay dividends for possibly another 5 or 6 or 7 years. And it started to pay dividends around the time of we won the Youth Cup final against Manchester United, but there were a group under that, the Woodgates and the Smiths, etc., etc., etc. Gary Speed and David Batty were already there, but a bit older. So there was, as it were, a team developing within a team then that team was going to win the European Cup. Is it a dream? Well, it was a dream, but it was a dream based on a very, very sound plan. And that sound plan worked until about 6 months before I left, when it was still working. But then takeovers started to get discussed and so on and so forth, which culminated in me receiving a call from a manager who was a friend saying, did I know that George Graham had got the job at Leeds United, which was a bit of a shock to me because I was still manager. So it was an intervention that, if you like, smashed that plan, which was about 3 years from fruition. Because if you look at the team that played in the semi-final of the Champions League later, most of that lot were products of the academy, or as it was called, Centre of Excellence then. So it was the first time that, possibly the first time, that someone in management had sat down with somebody who was keen enough and interested enough and knowledgeable enough to buy into the notion that football didn't necessarily have to be how it had been, that you could plan, you could build for the future. And Leslie, who'd started mixing paint in his garage when he came out of the RAF out of the war, had the foresight and the intelligence to recognise that and to buy into that and to want to be part of that. And to be fair, he was part of it, as will Bill Fotherby, for quite some time, Peter Gilmert as well, until, as I say, the intervention came from Caspian at a time when there was a move towards clubs being seen as valuable assets and turning themselves into limited companies. So that was the story of it, really. Fate intervened at a moment when we were actually on the cusp of moving into that final phase.
And when you did arrive at Leeds, as you said, the side you were inheriting were in Division 2 at the time. However, you arrived in October, which was 3 months into the season. And by that time, Leeds have won just one game and were sitting in 21st position and just only out of the relegation zone on goal difference. And because of that, what attracted you to becoming manager of Leeds, and how did you personally feel that you could have improved that side at the time and turned the season around?
Well, I've just explained the attraction of the big picture. The micro picture was that I'd done my work on players at Leeds, and the ones I thought could come forward with me, and the ones I thought might not. I had no doubts that their position at that point could be improved. I thought there were sufficient players there of sufficient quality. And I remember, I think the first time I spoke to the players, probably the most important thing was that was there for them to grasp was, I said, look, I've come here, there's a plane on the runway, that plane's going to take off. it's up to you between now and the end of the season whether you're on that plane or you're not. So we got down to work, and I think from my starting, we maybe went on to a 15 or 16 game undefeated run. I can't be precise, but it was a long run. Which then was, if you like, laying the foundations for what was to come, because I demonstrated by then to everybody at the club that change could be made. But more importantly, I got them to accept that change needed to be made. And that went throughout the club. So the ladies who worked in the kitchen came in to see me on my second day and asked me what would I like for lunch, and they gave me the menu, and it was chips and fish and chips and something else. And I politely said to them, look, I need to have a word with you, because you're going to be involved in something different. That diet is not the diet of an athlete, and we will be serving food which is fit for athletes and makes athletes fit. So it was just building that wall brick by brick, and making change. And sometimes change is painful, but it's more acceptable if people can see there's a pathway ahead, there's a road, that they can be part of that journey. They can see that that the road's being built, and that the destination at the end is very attractive. So it was just getting people to buy into that. Some people don't. That's fine. It's up to you. There's no, as it were, in my mind, likes or dislikes. The only thing that matters is, are you and do you want to be part of the journey, and are you willing, where necessary, to accept change? And if you're not, fine, great. If you don't agree with it, terrific. But if you are going to stay here, then you need to recognise that that's how it's going to be.
And because of them changes, obviously, you earned the nickname of Sergeant Wilco, something which you weren't because of the way you coached the team and because of that discipline. Was that something which you implemented to the squad on the very first day as Leeds United manager? Or was it something which you realised you had to do to get the best out of your players maybe a few weeks into your time at Leeds?
Well, the Sergeant Bilko thing's a legend that's a myth, because I don't believe it came from that. It came from a very popular TV series at the time, where they exchanged Wilco for Bilko. So there was a show on that was hilarious, and its main character was Sergeant Bilko. So it was an easy one for the fans to land on. So I became branded with that, though I'm not sure that it exactly fitted who I was. I believed in coaching. I believe in having a plan. I believe in getting people engaged in that plan, getting them to see where the benefits are for them. I think people like to be on a journey. They like to understand where they're going. They like to understand how they're going to get there. They like to understand how they might get there sooner. That's individually and collectively. And also, I think it's very, very important that they learn to understand what real team spirit is. Real team spirit isn't necessarily going out after a victory and getting canned up. That real team spirit is much more than that, much deeper than that. It's trust, it's belief, it's seeing yourself as part of a team. It's I remember asking a player once, what do you remember about the time at Leeds? I'd be interested in you writing it down. And he said, one of the things he said, which I hadn't recognized, but because it was behind me, he said, it's the first time I've ever seen a bench where the people on the bench were as animated with regard to the result and the performance as the people on the pitch. So the people on the bench did see themselves as part of the team on the pitch rather than spare parts sat on a bench off it.
Yeah, and in the first 22 games as Leeds United manager, you only lost 2, which was a very impressive start and saw a rise from 21st position. And because of that improvement, in March you began bringing in your own players to the club. The first of which was Gordon Strachan, who joined Leeds from Manchester United and was someone who played the majority of Manchester United games in their second place finish in Division 1 the previous year. Because of that, how did you manage to entice Gordon to make the move to Leeds? Because not only was he moving from Manchester United to Leeds, who are obviously and still are fierce rivals, but he was dropping down, similar to yourself, from a successful Division 1 side to Leeds, who were struggling in Division 2.
Well, number one, by then he'd realised that his time at Manchester United was rapidly drawing to a close. That's what the manager had conveyed to him. Secondly, he was at an age and he was sufficiently intelligent to understand that integral to what I wanted to do was the need for leadership. And leadership's not just about the man at the top. Leadership's, when it's best demonstrated, is about everybody. It's about everybody being willing to take responsibility for themselves in particular, but for each other as well. And I persuaded him that in my plan for the future, someone like him could be very integral to developing that sort of feeling, because he'd always demonstrated everything I wanted to see in players, which is that it's there's no I in team, that we is better than me, and he demonstrated that in his football career before that. And as it were, coming to, if you like, the last act of his play, he saw that as a nice challenge, and one which he accepted and one which he performed very successfully.
Strachan joined Leeds for a reported £200,000, and Chris Fairclough followed in the same month for £500,000 from Tottenham, and then Carl Schutt arrived in April. And although in today's transfer market, them sums might not seem huge, but in 1989, especially for a Division 2 side, that was obviously a lot of money. But that season, Leeds obviously didn't get promoted to Division 1. But in the following season, as we know, Leeds did gain promotion and won the title. But before that season started, was that the only objective that would have been successful because of the money that was spent and the project that you had for Leeds United?
No, because Leslie and the other two directors were fully conversant with, if you like, the stages in the plan. That within a plan you have to have landmarks, and those landmarks have to be clearly identified, so that people, as it were, constantly can recognise, hang on a minute, so we've just won 5 games on the trot. That's not going to make us champions, nor is that going to cause us to win the European Cup. That's just part of the process, and that what we've got to see is that there's a bigger picture here, and in that way we've got a better perspective. So one example would be me setting out with their agreement. They've got to agree. Me setting out with their agreement. Well, let's go for 6-game acts in the play, if you like. Let's look at the first 6, see where we are then let's look at the next 6, which gives you a better able to focus on the next game, if you like. Forget about what's after that. Yeah, I want you to think just of the next game, but I also want you to say, well, this average of 1.5 points or whatever per game is important, and therefore there's no game more important than the next one, and yet there's no game less important than the next one. All those are just bricks in the wall, and if we're going to build a wall, we that's what it's going to be, one brick at a time. So it's just getting people who can see and buy into that shared responsibility, and it being very, very important with regard to not just being winners, because you can finish in the middle of the league and be winners if you've overachieved at that point. So for me, winning's a very individual thing. It's a very winning the leagues for everybody and winning the leagues for the manager and so on and so forth. But as you're moving along in the bigger picture, people progress at different rates, and so it's important for me to get over to them, to the individuals. Look, yes, compare yourself with Gordon Strachan, who's a great role model, but at the same time, recognise that you're not him, and that your road will be slightly different to his road. Yeah, you'll use all the same things that he uses, like the gear stick and the brake pedal and so on and so forth. But your way of getting around the track or getting up the mountain will be slightly different to you, because we're all different. And what we've got to recognise is, how do we get all those individuals into working as a unit, but recognising that people do have strengths and weaknesses, and we as individuals have to see that, and have to be generous. And some people have the ability to. I mean, I think I played Gary Speed in every position apart from goalkeeper at one stage or another, because that was Gary. You could sit Gary down, and he'd go, yeah, okay, I understand that there's a need for me. Sometimes it happened in games. I'm not saying I picked him there, but I'd make a substitution and say, go play left back, or I'd make a substitution and say, go play up front, or Gary moved from wide into midfield, and so on. So he was typical of that sort of, if you like, multifaceted player that you need if you can get them. But then there are other players who are not like that. There are other players who can only, as it were, drive down that road. And they drive down that road very, very successfully. And so long as you don't ask them to drive down another road, you've got to then fit them in the side if they're making the team better. And other players have to recognise that. So don't ask Lee Chapman in some change of team during the game or whatever to go and play right back. I mean, that's a daft example, but there are players who you can say. Gary Speed was one. Lucas Radebe was another. And there were quite a few in that group like that. So it's the team recognising themselves as individuals, but also recognising that the team's bigger than they are as individuals.
And that brings an end to section 1 of episode 29.
Join us next week for section 2, where Howard speaks about Leeds' Division 1 title in 1992 and being crowned the last proper champions of England before the formation of what we now know as the Premier League in 1992, and as well as his departure from the club in 1996. Thanks for listening.